Hello, hello, hello. I got to get used to that, Hannah, but it's 2026 and welcome back, everybody. You know what? I have missed this. The last 2 weeks, because of the holidays, Christmas and the New Year's, we took off from this webinar. And I have to admit, I missed it. I felt like I was not doing our job, and that's educating everyone on how you buy globally. But I am so excited that today we have brought this back because we've got a lot to bring to the table this year in 2026. 2026 is going to be where Airdomo becomes a household name. Hey, everyone, I'm Stephanie Gills, and I'm the co-founder of Airdomo. And today we've got Hannah Maverick here with me today. She's always my partner in crime on this. And we're going to talk about how we're buying abroad, but also the budget pitfalls. What are buyers missing? We always underestimate stuff, right, Hannah?
Yeah, exactly. And hello everyone. I'm so happy that we're back. And I'm happy we're back with such an important topic because this one directly protects buyers, right? We see people fall in love with a property and run the numbers, and then they realize that the ongoing costs and the fees and the taxes completely change the picture. We've seen it so many times. So today we're going to break down the most common hidden costs of buying abroad and how the buyers can actually plan realistically from day one. So why don't we jump in? Starting with the obvious, why buyers underestimate costs? What happens? What's the root of that problem? Why do they so often underestimate the real cost of buying overseas?
Well, it's what we do everywhere, right? We're using the headline prices only, right? We're misled because we see that glamorous headline and we think that is all that it is, right? We'll look at the purchase price and then maybe the stamp duty, but we're going to ignore everything else that comes with ownership in that country or in that island, right? The costs vary dramatically by country. And you cannot assume that your home country norms apply everywhere else because they are so very different. Legal fees, transfer taxes, notary costs, registration fees, and even commissions can work very differently abroad. Even the way that you can even become an owner works very differently. You have to be approved in order to be a landowner, right? And so you cannot think about what it is you're doing here or wherever your home country is. I've had multiple times through LinkedIn, through social media, people reach out to us because they find out about Airdomo a little too late. They see us on these webinars and they'll message me and say, Stephanie, I already have a deposit on a condo or on a house. I haven't done any other due diligence because it's under construction. And I'm like, wait a minute, you haven't applied for ownership? You haven't done this piece? You can't do that. There is a step-by-step process here, and you can't take that for granted, and you can't look at that headline price only. That's for sure.
And that's usually where that great deal can quietly turn into a frustrating one, and even clients end up dropping it. But let's take it one by one. So, what about closing costs? What are the legal and transaction expenses that buyers often forget to factor in?
This is a big one, okay? Depending on the country, closing costs can range from 5% to well over 15% of a purchase price. And that's going to vary, right? Because taxes, transfer taxes. Some of these countries don't have yearly property taxes. They charge them all up front one time. And that's why you'll see that over 15%. It seems high, but you'll never pay them again. But you've got to budget for that, right? You can't go out with 2.5 million US dollars and only spend 2.5 million US dollars. You really need to have that extra money because you cannot overlook your notary fees, your title registrations, that transfer tax or stamp tax, some of the countries call them, and legal representation. We've got to make sure that we are doing that document certification the way that that country wants it to take place. And a lot of times that's going to require local legal, which we're going to make sure that we're working through with our partnerships. And then you're also going to have bank and escrow fees because the money has to translate. The money's got to get from point A to point B, and it's got to be protected as well. Okay. Now, in some markets, buyers will also pay the commission, and that
Yeah.
surprises some people. because they might think in their area that the seller would pay the commission. But that's not always the case. And so that's another way that you need to be, thinking about that country specific, culture and how things are handled. But that's what we're here for. We know those things in house. And that's why we're taking that heavy lift away from you so that all you have to focus on is where you want to plant your body.
Exactly. And I do also want to say sometimes people are like, oh, it's 4, 5, 6, 7%. That's not a lot. When you think about it on a seven-figure purchase, that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And sometimes people don't think about that. And then the next one is the ongoing ownership costs. So once the purchase is done, what ongoing costs catch buyers off guard usually?
Well, this is going to be specific, right? Because, if you're paying $50 a week for your grass to be mowed at home, that doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen in the place that you're buying, right? And so we need to have that due diligence done because you need to know, are there annual property taxes, right? Is there an HOA or building management fees that you must pay? What does the insurance look like? Right? And how does that happen? Is it hurricane, can you insure for hurricanes? That's a big one, right? Maintenance and repairs. What does maintenance generally look like, especially on that island with labor and the availability? Okay. And then utilities and services, which you should be able to obtain by, asking the current owner. And then also security and concierge fees. A lot of the luxury developments or the branded residents that you hear us talk about, they have, the concierge right there on site. They have the personal chefs. They have all these benefits, but that comes along with gratuities and it comes along with some other fees for staffing and amenities and upkeeps and things like that that you need to consider as well.
Exactly. I think every buyer should ask themselves, what does this property cost me every year, even if I don't use it? Because
Yeah.
that question alone changes how people evaluate a deal. Absolutely. Moving on to rental related costs as well. For buyers that are planning to rent their property, what costs do they tend to underestimate?
Well, rental income is great, but it's not always 100% profit. And that's okay too. I have a lot of clients they're not worried so much about making profit on the rental income. They just want the rental income to pay for the property, right? So,
Yeah.
you can find both and you can also find profitable rentals, obviously. But, common rental costs, property management fees. You have to have a property manager. Don't think you're going to manage this property from afar. It's never going to work, right? Cleaning and turnover costs. Those are things you can pass on to a renter, but you also need to go ahead and budget for those just because if the property sits vacant for a bit, you're going to need to send some people in. Just vacant homes collect things, right? Marketing and
Mhm.
platform fees. You're going to need to advertise it, get it on the different platforms for rent to make sure people know. And then also, you're going to have to budget for repairs because even if your guests are perfect, there's going to be normal wear and tear, and it's not going to last forever. You're going to have to, do furniture replacement over time. And then, of course, you've got to look at the fact of, the local taxes on rentals. Is there one? Is there a hotel tax that they make you pay? Is there tourist levies that you have to pay? And so in some countries, rental income is taxed locally. So you have to, take that into consideration as well too.
Exactly. And I think the smartest buyers run net numbers, not
Yeah.
really the gross income projections. And those net numbers are usually very different from what people expect. But going into a big one, taxes and cross-border costs, these always confuse buyers. What should they be thinking about here?
Well, this is what everybody misunderstands, okay? It's
Mhm.
the biggest one that you misunderstand when you're buying abroad, okay? But buyers have got to look at property and municipal taxes. Do they exist? Are they yearly? Are they upfront? How are they assessed? Does that property get assessed yearly or does it ever get assessed again? right? Is there those rental income taxes? We just talked about that. Is there capital gain taxes on resale, right? Do you have to hold the property so long before that tax is assessed, right? Or maybe that tax is waived. Is there withholding taxes? And is there an inheritance
Hmm.
tax or a succession rule if you've bought this property to be what I call a legacy property and you will it down to your family and your heirs once you pass? So, you've got to understand also, how is your home country taxing your foreign property or income? Just because your property, let's say my property's in Turks and Caicos, I still have to put that property and disclose to the United States that I have that property in Turks and Caicos. I may not pay any additional taxes on it here, but I have to disclose it. And I may or may not pay taxes in Turks and Caicos depending on, what the situation is and what I'm doing with that. So what you don't want to have happen is after the fact that you didn't do any of this and then you end up being taxed twice, or you get in trouble for non-disclosure, or you don't plan on these taxes, you don't budget for these taxes, and then it eats up all your profit, and then there was absolutely no money there to be made and it was all pointless, right?
Yeah, and that's where exactly proper advice upfront really pays off. And this is what we always say to our buyers. Um, Moving into also a one that comes with a big warning sign, country specific costs and traps. Are there any country specific costs buyers often don't see coming?
Yes, and some of these you don't hear of in maybe your norm home country. So, like for example, mandatory sinking fund. Now, some people might hear of that here in the States. When you're a developer, you hear of a sinking fund, and that's where you have to contribute to the public services, sewer, water, electricity, whatever the case might be. So, in some of these countries, as you buy property, you might be contributing to the mandatory sinking funds that get put aside. And then as services like that have to be upgraded, they have the money to do so, right? And a lot of times those exist because maybe they're not charging yearly taxes, okay? But they still have to have budgeted money to do those improvements, okay? There could be special assessments for building repairs. We know this with condominiums, right? How old is the condominium building? Does it need a new roof? Is the pool needing to be resurfaced? What is coming up that might require a special assessment on top of that monthly or yearly maintenance fee, right? Is there a
Hmm.
ground rent or leasehold renewal fees? We've covered areas like the Maldives. The Maldives, you will have a leasehold estate. So, what that means is you will have a lease on that land for maybe 90 years. That's your home, but you don't own that land. You're leasing that land.
Yeah.
And is there a fee attached to that land, right? And so you need to understand, is there a charge or a fee for that? And what does that cost? And then foreign buyer surcharges, right? Because you're foreign, there might be an additional surcharge. And then infrastructure and development levies. That also goes back to that mandatory sinking fund. If the town, the city, the country is putting in additional infrastructure for a new construction development or improvements, then they might be assessing each and every unit or villa that's in that to contribute toward that too. And that's okay, but you just need to ask these questions, because here's the thing. We have rules in the United States, and it's called seller's disclosure. Okay. It's a form, it's federally regulated and it's state regulated on the local scale. It's something we're very familiar with, and it's something that must be required in a residential transaction, not elsewhere. It's not elsewhere. So if you don't ask, they don't tell. So it's very important that
Yeah,
you know.
exactly. And those
And I
are the
don't mean to
details
scare people. I
that
just
get
mean
missed.
you got to think about it, right?
No, absolutely. That's why we're talking about it.
Mhm.
Now, very important how we budget properly. And I know you have a rule for this. How should buyers actually budget to avoid these pitfalls?
Okay, people argue with me on this. And I'm a conservative person because I like to have money left over. Okay. I want to over budget just because I don't ever want to be standing there. And this is what I always say, you all can laugh, but I don't ever want to be standing there with my pants down. Okay. That's my whole saying. All right. So I would recommend adding 10 to 20% on top of the purchase price as a buffer, depending on the country. That's why that range 10 to 20%. Okay. Now, I have people all the time, you're nuts, Stephanie. No, I'm not. I promise you I'm not. And you're going to love me for it because everybody loves the surprise at the end of the year when you have money left over. And then you're going to send me a very nice gift because you have money left over. Right, Hannah?
I love that. Absolutely.
I mean, look, here's the thing. You've got to have your acquisition costs, right? The cost of the property. You've got to have your annual ownership. What's it cost to own that property? And then if you have any income that's coming in, you can count it, but my rule is don't, in a way, because what if it doesn't rent? I assume the worst so that I'm always standing there with my pants on.
Exactly. And if the deal still makes sense after all of this, then it's probably a solid purchase.
That's right.
I mean, that framework alone prevents most buyers from regretting it. So to close this out, how do we actually help the buyers avoid surprises? Why don't you tell us about that?
This is my favorite. We make sure your pants stay up the entire time and your butt is never showing, right? Because we're focusing on transparency. We're going to make sure that there's nothing hidden from you because we do the clear breakdowns of the total cost. We make sure that we know the country specific guidance, that we vetted the legal, that we understand the taxes, that we know the realistic rental assumptions, because somebody that's representing the property is all obviously going to make it sound better than it is, right? We're going to give you the realistic numbers. We're not going to sugarcoat this, okay? Our goal is that you know exactly what you are signing up for before you ever commit. That's what builds confidence. That's what makes Airdomo special. And that's what I have spent the last several years doing behind the scenes. And now we're bringing it to everyone because it's so important. As you know, this world is not as big as we think it is. And it is so amazing to be able to invest and buy properties in all these different places and to really live the life that you want to live. You know, you don't have to buy the apartment building down the street when you can own a phenomenal island home or, a ski lodge or whatever the case might be in some glamorous place. Right, Hannah?
Exactly. This is what I'm talking about. So thank you, Stephanie. This was actually incredibly valuable. And I know a lot of our audience really likes these kinds of episodes where they get to hear your tips and tricks. So for everyone who's watching, if you're considering buying abroad and you really want that clear picture of all the costs involved, you can either book a complimentary call on Airdomo, you can explore our vetted properties, and reach out to us for personalized guidance. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you in the next session.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.